In 1963, in his inaugural address as governor of Alabama, George Wallace declared, "Segregation now, segregation forever." This marked the beginning of a renewed fight for equal rights. A little more than a year later, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted on July 2, 1964, which prohibited, among other things, racial segregation in schools. In Dothan, schools were integrated in 1965 using a program called Freedom of Choice. Freedom of Choice was the name for a number of plans developed in the U.S. during 1965 to 70, aimed at the integration of schools in states that had a segregated educational system.
I chose to start high school in 10th grade at Dothan High School. It was a very different experience. Not to brag, but I should explain that one of the things that was my experience as a student in my earlier years, I was a co-salutatorian of my junior high school class. I always enjoyed learning and always excelled academically. What I really felt in making that choice to go to Dothan High School was that I was making a step in my own personal civil rights walk, to go and be a part of demonstrating our equality, demonstrating our competence as a people to go and walk side by side with the majority race in a majority environment and to demonstrate success there. I was fortunate in being the first black male inducted into the Honor Society at Dothan High. The woman who accompanied me in that first was Mary Jean Ingram. That experience was an eye-opening experience. What we as blacks had believed was that these were superior schools, that they were a ladder to a better life, an opportunity to achieve more, to learn more than would have been the case in schools that we knew were less well funded and less well regarded in the mainstream. I discovered that I was not as much at a disadvantage academically as might have been imagined, given the mentality that existed and the pervasive stereotypes that existed at that point in time. One thing I can recall is that in my first biology class, the teacher there gave a test actually at the beginning of class. The first day of class, she gave us what was essentially a diagnostic test to, I think for her, determine kind of what the level of readiness was and scientific knowledge that students possessed coming into her classes. And I imagine that gave her a sense of just kind of what challenge she faced in instruction for that year. I and all of the students in that class, and clearly she was surprised that I had the highest score out of all of her sections of class. It was evident in the way that when she, in my class, came back and gave that result, she said it with the most dramatic tone and looked at me with eyes of just amazement and wonder. And everyone in the class stopped. I mean, there was just a silence in the class that was like, ooh, and it was kind of interesting. But the thing is, I'd always been a kid interested in science. I'd read everything that I could put my hands on about it. So it's not so surprising in that regard. It just happened to be something that I was good at and enjoyed. But what it did was that it kind of set a tone, I think, and it made students there curious about me, because it was something that none of them had ever expected, and none of them knew what to make of it. So I didn't have, I think, some of the most negative experiences in that regard. there were few students who were cordial and friendly, very few. Well, kind of one of the things that emerged, and it's kind of interesting, is that the students who did feel most comfortable reaching outside of the norm of the society, if you will, and reaching across the racial line to communicate with me and, you know, have lunch and those kinds of things, were among the wealthier and better off students in the environment. So what kind of ended up as a peculiar dynamic was that some of the students who had been, some of the guys who had been kind of negative, and some who had said some things that were racist, started trying to warm up to me, because some of the girls that were friends of mine were girls that they wanted to become friends with, and so they wanted to use me as a tool to kind of get them entree into meeting and talking with folks that they were not so comfortable with. I should stop here as an aside and say one thing that I did note in going to Dothan High was that it was a very classist environment at that point in time. It was the only high school in Dothan. I mean, it was the only. Well, it was the predominantly white high school, and then there was a black high school. So, in that, all of the whites in the city that attended a public high school here in Dothan went there, and it was, and those class divisions were visible. It shook out academically in there being kind of two academic tracks in that school. They had general education, and then they had college prep, and in fact they had a third, which was honors. So those students who kind of, so it ended up being kind of a natural, I say a natural, and forgive me if this seems classist, but there seemed to be a real a class stratification that took place with the general curriculum and the college prep and honors. I, because of my academic achievement, took college prep and honors courses, and of course I was college bound. That was an expectation of my family, and it was not something that was discussed or even lectured about. It was just assumed. Everybody in my family was college educated. The thing that happened was I went in freedom of choice for 10th and 11th grade, and then in my senior year, the 69-70 school year, desegregation hit Dothan. Carver High School was phased out of existence, and all quite suddenly, all of the black students from Carver High School were transferred to Dothan High School. In their senior year, they lost all of the things that had been a part of their expectations for a senior year. I mean, we all know how we value senior year and those activities and being the top of the heap, the big men and women on campus, and all of a sudden, totally unexpectedly, that fall, their school was closed, and they came to this alien environment for them, an unwelcoming environment for them. And I was in this unique position of an observer, being black, but being a part of that environment as well, and seeing all of a sudden people that I knew from junior high school, my friends and compatriots, who suddenly were in this environment with me, but not there for the reasons that I was there, but there because they were forced to be. I saw the pain that they endured. I saw and felt much of the anger that they felt at having this happen to them. One of the things that struck me was how even though the schools are desegregated, the classes remained largely the same. There were no more than one or two more black people in the classes I was taking in the college prep and honors track of courses. It seemed that all of the black people had been phased into the general curriculum. What was surprising for me was that many of my classmates that I knew were college bound weren't in the college prep and honors courses that I was taking. And I never knew, and I don't know that they ever knew what happened and why that happened, but there was still segregation. My white high school still existed in that building with black students in that building, but my classes were still pretty much white. And that's something that I guess only in retrospect. Again, it was my senior year. Everything kind of happened so fast that it was only in retrospect that I look back and say, wow, they managed to desegregate the schools and still keep them segregated. That was a stunning achievement if you think about it. You know, not something that was a great thing, but that's what they did. And those students lost, if they were in the band, for instance, they didn't get incorporated into the Dothan High School band. The Carver High School band got called an ROTC band, as I recall it, and they, as members of that band, were not members of the Dothan High School band. Everything from homecoming to prom and all, those were activities that they did not get to participate in. Those of us know elections for class officers and all take place at the end of the previous year. So when those students came over, all of those class officers were gone because the class officers were the students who had been elected at Dothan High in 11th grade. And for all of the organizations and the like, they were relegated to very clearly second-class citizenship in that environment. It was a cruel and painful period for them, and many to this day tear up when talking about that experience and how painful and how horrific it was for them, and how demeaning and dehumanizing it was for them, because they felt powerless. They felt manipulated and exploited and just disparaged by it. That said, the underlying divisions by race that existed then continued. As I mentioned, that was senior year, and everybody was thrown together. But the white high school continued its own sense of identity, and when class reunion came up at 10th year out of high school, not one of the blacks was invited to the Dothan High School reunion, even though that's the school that they graduated from and that their diplomas read. And it was interesting that I wasn't invited either. Even though I had attended Dothan High for my entire high school career. Neither I nor either of the other two persons who attended. When I attended Dothan High in 10th grade and started there, I was one of three blacks in that class: Marion Griffin, Linda Kemp, and I. We kind of were a tight knit team because of the fact that we did have in common our experience there.